Mike, I appreciate you coming back, man.
Thank you very much for having me back. I liked I like talking about the things you want to talk about. And it's good.
Absolutely.
And I thank you for pushing the books. We're going to talk about homicide is my business and Luigi to Zip this time. Again,
Absolutely.
hope I entice your listeners and viewers to go out and buy the book. I think they'll enjoy it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Hey, before you get started, a quick side note.
Yeah.
Have you been paying attention to this case that's going on right now? It's being broadcasted on Court TV. This Robert Tellis case out of Las Vegas. Telles.
The name is familiar. I don't think I've watched
Man,
anything on
Mike,
TV.
you got to do some research into this case, man. After you get some free time, you won't believe what a mess this guy has got himself into. I
What
mean,
is he
he's the
charged?
biggest. He's charged with murder. He's a Democrat politician out of Las Vegas. I forget what office he holds. It's a real strange office name that he held. But he held this office. This reporter, who, come to find out, he used to be an old mob reporter. He used to report on Tony Spilatro out there in Las Vegas.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess the Las Vegas mob was like going to this reporter's house and threatening him and all this. So anyway, that same reporter is doing a story on this Robert Tellis. Come to find out, he finds out he's cheating on his wife, of course, with a woman at his office. He's got got pictures going in and out of the vehicle. So he gets all pissed off with him with that. Then he ends up writing a story and ends up costing him his election.
Wow.
He loses his job, he loses his marriage, and then what's he do? He's seen right because you know in every neighborhood everyone's got a doorbell camera.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
he's seen in his wife's car casing this neighborhood out where this journalist lives. He gets out wearing a big hat and an orange shirt, trying to look like a landscaper guy, I guess.
Oh, I now know what you're talking about. Yeah.
And he hides right. It was like 10:30 in the morning. Hides right by his front door, and just waits for the guy to get back home. Calls his name to the side of his door and stabs him and slits his ear to ear. And it's all on camera. They raid his house. And he cut up his hat and all the evidence, but he didn't throw it out. He just put it underneath his couch. You wouldn't believe. And then man, the dumb shit. You wouldn't believe the next dumb thing this guy has done. I'm just like, this guy can't be real.
Hey, Mike, thank God most criminals are dopes, because otherwise we'd never be able to catch him. Because, I mean, what does he think by cutting the thing up and leaving it under his couch? He's going to tell him it belonged to someone else. I mean, that's ridiculous.
He says that he's getting framed. This is that's no lie. His defense. He is getting framed, and he's getting framed by a small construction company that he was going to shut down while he was in office.
Wow.
And they're trying to make him look bad. So they went and killed this guy, and that's his defense. I mean, it is crazy, man.
Well,
crazy.
You hit it right on the head, man. Those Ring doorbell cameras CCTV are the death knell for lots of bad guys these days, So,
Mike, you couldn't flick a cigarette. You couldn't flick a cigarette nowadays. Walking, you know what I mean?
Correct.
You wouldn't have no problem finding it. I mean, it's crazy.
My wife and I like to watch a lot of these British crime shows that are on usually on BritBox or Acorn, and I got to tell you, how any criminal gets away with anything in England is beyond me, because there's CCTV everywhere, down alleys, all kinds of stuff. It's incredible. Certainly a lot more than they have here in the United States. But
I've
the
heard
proliferation of these doorbell cameras is sort of catching up. So, you got to be crazy to commit a crime to begin with, but to do it out in the open like that and think you're not going to get caught is nuts. So
Yeah.
and
Yeah, but I'll send you over a little link to that Telus case. You gotta watch a couple videos on it. I mean, it's entertaining to say the least. You'll just sit there and shake your head. I mean, it's just you're like, oh, this guy can't be serious. But yeah. So anyway, man, where do you want to start off? Do you want to start off with Luigi or the mob cops?
Well, let's start off with Luigi. I've talked about the mob cops a lot. We'll talk about them, but let's talk about Luigi, because awesome. I think that I ran across a lot of interesting, a lot of strange, a lot of bad, and a lot of good people during the course of all the time I spent as a prosecutor and in my 10 years as a defense attorney. And I have to say, a guy that will stick out in my mind forever is Luigi Roncesvalli, for lots of reasons. The first being that, when I was assigned to him as I was to debrief him, because he had gone into the FBI and then the FBI turned him over to the NYPD, and the NYPD knew that there was an open murder case that he was involved in and confessed to, and I had the case. So they brought him to the DA's office. And my boss at the time assigned him to me because he was claimed that he had a lot of information about a lot of things in Brooklyn, and they wanted me to debrief him. So I did, and for the next, I would say 4 or 5 months, I had him in my office, if not every day, almost every other day. Talking to him about the things that he did, things that he knew about, and it's the first
so time. He just kind of fell right in your lap.
Oh yeah, he was thrown right in my lap, absolutely. And the reason why, Mike? Because his last name was Roncesvalli, my last name Vecchione. The vowel at the end were both Italian, and they figured that this guy would respond to me. And bottom line is, he did. He did. Let me just tell you. We'll just get back to what I was saying, and then I want to tell you about our first meet. I remember him and will never forget him. He's the first person and the first bad guy that I had dealt with who was a mafia informant, and who was a guy, not the first mafia figure I ever dealt with, because I had prosecuted 2 of them before, but this guy was an informant, and he was from Sicily, and he was really a hardcore guy. And I learned a lot about the mafia. I learned a lot about organized crime from him, and it was something that not only was entertaining to me because I was interested in this stuff, but I learned a lot from it and became a much better prosecutor and a much better lawyer as a result of it. And I think now an author because of the things that he told me, and so. That's why he sticks out in my mind, in addition to his colorful personality and his stories, which were, something which quite frankly, I'm not going to lie, entertained me while I was talking to him. He had a very strange sense of honor. He said that he came to America because he wanted to become what he called a man of honor. And in Sicily, that meant a made man. But in America, it became a lot different for him because he realized that there was really no honor among thieves in America. He was very, very, very surprised about the way that the American mafia operated and how different it was from the Sicilian mafia. So, but let me tell you why we hit it off right away. He came into my office. 2 detectives brought him in and sat down. Well, actually, a conference room. My office at that time was very small, and he sat down. The detectives basically said to me from the homicide bureau of the police department, they said, "Mike, he's yours." So I had 2 detectives from the DA's office sit in with me, and he sat down. And I have to tell you, Mike, when I saw him, I couldn't believe that this guy was a hitman. You have in your mind the things that Hollywood likes you to think about in terms of what a hitman looks like, what a mafia figure is supposed to look like. This guy looked like, a plumber, looked like the guy the guy that was going to empty the trash cans in my office. He was about 5'5". He was 5'5" high, 5'5" wide. He had on He didn't have on a prison jumpsuit or anything. He had these black pants, pointy shoes, and this shirt that looked like he had been wearing for probably 2 weeks. And I said to him, he looked horrible. Looked like he was down. He looked like he certainly hadn't done anything in jail that would have made himself feel better, like take a shower or anything. And I said to him, "Are you hungry?" And he said, "Yeah." And he said to me, "What they feed me in jail is merde, which is in Italian shit." And I said, "Okay, what do you want?" So he said, I'd like a veal cutlet Parmesan Hero and a bottle of beer. So I sent one of the detectives to the Italian restaurant not far from the office, got him exactly what he wanted, and that was it, Mike. From that point on, he and I were best friends. He asked me about my family, wanted to know where they came from in Italy, and it was he had found someone who he could relate with, relate to, and relate with. So we got off on a very, very good note, and the first thing I talked to him about was the case that I had, because he had gone to the FBI first, and I'll tell you why in a few moments, to turn himself in. He had felt he was betrayed by the American mafia, and he went to the FBI and told them what he knew, and he knew a lot, and he knew about some really bad people, not only from America but also in Italy and in Sicily. And when they had finished debriefing him, he had told them about a homicide in Brooklyn that he had committed, and that's the homicide that led them to bring him to the police department, and then the police to bring him to me. And I'll just tell you. So this when I tell you about this homicide, it kind of sets the stage for what he believed was and the honorable thing to do, because he said to me at one point, "I only kill people who deserve to be killed." Essentially, he said they were dishonorable people, and he said, and more importantly, I didn't even kill them. They didn't die because of me. He said they died because of the person who paid me to kill them. That was his way of thinking. Really kind of strange code of honor that this guy had. And it's kind of personified essentially in this story. The case in Brooklyn that was open that I had was the killing of a chef in an Italian restaurant in a very big Italian neighborhood in the southern part of Brooklyn called Dyker Heights, Bensonhurst. And you probably have heard of Bensonhurst if you are a mafia guy and like to, I don't mean that you're in the mafia, but that you're interested in mafia. So the name of the restaurant was the New Corner Restaurant. And it was a very popular place, very good food. And the chef in the place, a guy named Enzo, was targeted by the Gambino family because his niece, the chef's niece, went to her family and told the family that this guy had been raping her over the course of several years. And when she finally told her family about this, they didn't go to the police. They went to the Gambino family to extract justice. And the Gambino family hired a guy or contracted a killer to go and shoot this guy and kill him. So that killer went to the restaurant, and while he was waiting outside, he knew what the guy looked like. While he was waiting outside for him to come out after work, he sat there for an hour or two because he needed to wait for the guy. He wasn't sure when he was leaving. But he saw there were a lot of police cars all in the neighborhood. There were unmarked cars, there were marked cars. And this guy said, "I got to get out of here." He said, "This is crazy." And he took off. He left. He just abandoned the job. Turns out he thought that the cops were there on a stakeout, got spooked. It turns out the cops were there to eat dinner. That's where the local cops would go because the food was that great. So he took off. Very embarrassing. Very embarrassing to the Gambinos. So they went then. Well, the guy who had originally contracted this first killer was very familiar to Luigi. He had done jobs for together, and Luigi had done jobs for the Gambinos, even though he was primarily working for the Bonanno family.
Mike, what year was this? What year did you get him?
I got him in around 1979 is when I got him.
Right.
He came to
I was just trying to think of when this is all taking place.
Yeah, he came to the United States in the early 60s, 62, 63. But so this was 1979, because I left the DA's office about a year or so after that to go to private practice. So so the Gambino goes to Luigi and tells Luigi what the story is. And Luigi says, no problem. He says, I'm not even going to charge you what I would normally charge you because the guy deserves to die. So Luigi takes the contract, and the first thing he does is he begins to call the restaurant to find out if Enzo was working. And as it turns out, he made 4 or 5 calls, and Enzo was never there. Finally, he learns in the last call that Enzo was in Sicily visiting his mother. And they said he'll be back in a week. So in a week, Luigi calls again, and they say Enzo's not here. His mother died in Italy, and in Sicily, and he had to stay for the funeral, etc. So undeterred, Luigi kind of bided his time, and he waits a week or two, and he finally calls, and he says, "I'm looking for Enzo. Enzo here?" He said he's back, but he's not working. He's not working now. He'll be in later. That was it. Now they had the time set up. So what he does is Luigi goes to this Gambino soldier. They go pick up this young girl because Luigi doesn't know what Enzo looks like. They bring her to the restaurant, and they sit outside across the street, and they wait. Enzo was supposed to come to work at like 4 o'clock in the afternoon, and they wait. And Luigi tells her, when you see him, you point him out. So he comes in, comes up, goes into the restaurant, and she points him out. He says, okay. They take the girl home. Now he waits, and they wait until around closing time, which 10 o'clock, 10:30, 11, something like that. Drive him back. Same Gambino guy drives him. Luigi has a gun, and he gets out of the car, and he walks into the back of the restaurant to the kitchen. And he encounters someone immediately, and he says, I'm looking for Enzo. Enzo here? And the guy in broken English says, yeah, Enzo, he's over there. So Luigi walks over, calls out his name. Enzo turns around, looks at him, and Luigi shoots him in the head. Falls. Luigi puts another one into his head and leaves the restaurant. Gets into the car, hands the gun to the Gambino guy and says, get rid of this. Drop me off at my car. And Luigi does what he normally would do after a hit, drives to Atlantic City and spends a week in Atlantic City and comes home after the heat is down. The problem was later on, Luigi finds out that the Gambino guy didn't get rid of the gun, and it had been recovered in another homicide. So, but he was at that point an informant, so it didn't make a difference. So that is the case. That is the case that I had, and that's the case that the cops brought him to the DA's office to get rid of. And he wanted a deal. He didn't want to go to trial. He was dead to right. He had confessed not only to the police, but to the FBI. Now he confessed to me. So he needed to continue working. And I told him, look, there is room for work. There's room for work to work out a deal here. But, I need to know everything you've done. And we then embarked on, as I said, a several-month plan to talk about all of the things that Luigi had done in America. Turns out he had done about 13 homicides in the United States. He didn't remember, a lot of them he didn't remember the names, didn't remember, exactly where they were. And they were early too. And they were, to me, there really wasn't much I could do with them because they were too old. But this one I could prosecute, and he knew I could prosecute it. So I told him, listen, I got to hear more. So he started to tell me about it. And I said, you got to tell me about, what you've done in America. Tell me how you got here. Why are you here? You came from Sicily. And he tells me his story. And Mike, in Sicily, he wanted to become a made man in the worst way. And he told me, and he later tells a congressional hearing, because he wound up testifying in front of Congress. President Ronald Reagan had an organized crime task force that was doing, and it had a commission on organized crime. And he had a series of hearings all around the country at a particular time. And Luigi testified at one of those regarding drug sales in America, which he was involved in as well later on. So when a senator asked him about what he did for a living and why he did it, he said, Senator, homicide, that's where I got the title, homicide is my business. And why do I do it? He said, because in America, little boys grow up to want to become baseball players. In Sicily, little boys want to be mafia. And that's what he wanted to be from the time he was a little kid. So as he grew up, he became more and more interested, and he finally gets to the point where he feels that it's okay for him to approach the local Don in Catania, Sicily, which is not the center of the mafia in Sicily. The center of the mafia in Sicily is in Palermo, which is the capital. But in Catania, which is on the east coast, not that far from the mainland, from Italy, this guy, he called him Signor Rapisardi, was the Don, was the guy that was in charge. And Luigi wanted to meet Rapisardi in the worst way. Rapisardi had a social club / coffee shop in town. And Luigi one day decides, he gets the balls, and one day he walks in. And of course, he's stopped by one of Rapisardi's men and says, what are you doing here? And he says, I want to meet the Signore, I want to talk to him. And they tell him, get lost. He finally is persistent enough that once he walks in there, Rapisardi sees him and he recognizes him from the several other times he got thrown out, and he tells him to come over and sit down. Rapisardi was having a coffee. Luigi buys him a cup of coffee, and he sits down and tells him what he wants. Tells him he wants to be a made guy, and he wants to work for Rapisardi. And so Rapisardi does what ultimately happens in New York too. He puts him, he lets him has him do a lot of small things like collecting money from deadbeat loan shark victims and gambling victims and things of that nature. And Luigi's a sharp guy, very smart. At the time, he was actually even working. He was working for the railroad in Sicily. So he was doing the Rapisardi stuff when he wasn't working, and Rapisardi really liked him. Really thought he was a good guy. And he finally, after doing several jobs very successfully, Rapisardi tells him that I have a job for you, not here in Sicily, but in Milan, in Italy. I need you to kill a businessman in Milan. That's how quickly and how good and how well he was respected now by Rapisardi. So he tells me the story about how he had never left Sicily ever in his life. So he had to now figure out, and he figured out quickly how to get to Italy. He had to take a ferry across the Mediterranean into Italy. And then he gets to Naples. And from Naples, he has to take the train all the way up to Milan. And once he gets to Milan, he's got to find the victim. He knows who he is. He has some information. So he has to do some work and surveillance. And he does. Finally locates him, figures out when he goes to work, where he lives, etc. And one morning he stakes him out. He's staking out the guy, and this particular victim comes out and on his way to work, and Luigi kills him. Gets back on the train, back to Naples, across the water to Sicily. And I asked him, I said, how long did you stay? He said, it took me a couple of days. He says, in fact, I got into trouble with my wife. I said, why? What happened? He says, well, I don't tell her what I'm going to do. So he says, when I come home, first thing he did, before he even went to Rapisardi, he went to a florist and bought a big bouquet of flowers to bring home to his wife so he could, make peace with her if she was pissed off at him. So the next day now, he goes to the social club, to the coffee shop, and to meet Rapisardi. And what happens, he doesn't expect. Rapisardi is so happy with him that he gives him a newspaper. a newspaper from Italy. And on the front page is the homicide of the guy the businessman that he killed. Luigi is thrilled. He says, to me, I knew if I do something like this, it's not that long, I'm going to become a made man. Well, it didn't work out that way. Rappisardi had other deals for him. He went to Italy. He killed some people. He killed somebody right near the Trevi Fountain. I don't know if you know where that is in Rome, but it's a very, very big tourist area. And he killed somebody there. He killed somebody in another location. He killed somebody in Sicily for Rappisardi. And he did a bunch of homicides, but always for Rappisardi and always people who he said deserved to die because they were dishonorable. But he never did anything for himself, he tells me, until one thing happened. So I told you that he was working on a railroad and he had an argument with a guy. I don't remember what the argument was about. And the guy started bad-mouthing him behind his back. And Luigi didn't like that. He said he was dishonored me. And that's the one guy that he killed who was it was a personal thing and he killed him. So anyway, he does all of this work and he goes to Rappisardi and says, when are you going to make me a made man? When am I going to get to be a man of honor? And Rappisardi tells him, he fluffs him off. And quite frankly, Mike, I got to tell you that I think it had to do more with the way this guy looked and the way he carried himself than his success. As I told you, he was not somebody who looked like a guy that would be a mafia hitman. And I think that they didn't realize or didn't think that he'd be able to carry it off or maybe was kind of embarrassing to them, to Rappisardi. The word that the American mafia uses for guys like him when they come to America is zip. Call him a zip. And there's a lot of speculation as to what it means. They talk fast. The Sicilians used to use zip guns, these homemade, they now call them ghost guns in the United States. And they spoke very fast but it was a derogatory term. And I believe it was because of what this guy looked like in Sicily that he never was made. So Rappisardi tells him, why don't you go to Brooklyn? The Bonanos are looking for men like you. And they were. And the story is that Joe Bonanno and Carmine Galante, who was his second in command, big drug dealers in the United States. And what they wanted to do and what they had done is they had established what became known as the French Connection, with the Sicilian mafia. And the problem was that the Bonanos were making so much money. They didn't want to share it with the other families that they thought that they were going to have a war. So they were importing these guys from Sicily, these zips, to act as gunmen. And Luigi profited by this because that's why he came to America and how he got to America. And they told him to go. Rappisardi told him to go to Knickerbocker Avenue, which was the center of the Bonanno family in Brooklyn, the center of the whole of their Brooklyn operations, and to ask for to use his name as a way of introducing himself to the Bonanos. So he comes to America. He gets set up. He gets some of his people who he knew from before were coming to America. He found a guy who met him at the airport, picked him and his wife and his daughters up, and set him up in an apartment. And now he goes to Knickerbocker Avenue to become a made guy. And he walks into the social club. And what do you think happens? The exact same thing has happened in Sicily. Who are you? Get out of here. We don't know who you are. And he's persistent though. So one day he walks in and there's a guy at a table, very, very well dressed, drinking an espresso, has a little sambuca next to it, and he's reading the newspaper. And Luigi tells me that he said, I think this is the guy I needed to speak to. And his name was Pino de Quana. He was sort of the second in command in Knickerbocker Avenue, second in command of the Bonanos. The guy who was the head of the Bonanno family at that time on Knickerbocker Avenue was a guy named Peter Licata. So he goes to De Quana, and De Quana does the same thing that the guy in Sicily told him. Basically, who the hell are you? He tells him the name, Mr. Rapisardi told me to come to see you. And they tell him, get lost. But he's persistent. And he comes back. And finally, DeQuana tells him, sit down. He buys him a drink. And Luigi tells him what he's about. And DeQuana does, it's almost identical, Mike. DeQuana tells him, I'll use you. I'll use you for small jobs. And he spoke Sicilian and he spoke Italian. And in that area, a lot of the people who borrowed money and were not paying it back to the Bananos were Italian immigrants, Sicilian immigrants. So Luigi spoke the language. So he turned out to be a very valuable guy to DeQuana, because he would go with a guy who didn't speak Italian. He would go, and when they didn't want to pay, he'd speak to him in Italian and basically tell him in Italian, listen, I'm going to break your legs. I'm going to kill you, that kind of thing. So again, very successful. But Licata, who was the boss, didn't really want to get involved with him until something happens. Two things happened. The first is that Licata he was not into drugs. He was not into drugs at all. He didn't give a shit about. Carmine Galante was in jail at that time. Bonanno had been ultimately sent to Arizona because he tried to kill the members of the committee and the commission. So it was someone else who was in charge of Bananos at that time. But Licata was not getting involved in drugs. He was into loan sharking, gambling, and a bunch of other things, robberies, etc. So he had a casino, Licata, that was on the second floor above his social club. And he was losing money. Couldn't figure out why. So he knew that Luigi was a gambler, and he was. That was one of his problems. Gambler, he was a drinker, and he was a womanizer. And all three of those things got Luigi into trouble. So Licata says to him, listen, I want you to do me a favor. I want you to go upstairs tonight to the casino, and I want you to watch, and I want you to see who's cheating on me and how and why I'm losing money. Luigi goes up. He figures it out in 5 minutes. Two guys at the table, the blackjack table, are using counterfeit money. And the money was it was counterfeit. And they couldn't understand, the Bananos couldn't understand where it was coming from. He was losing money. And it turns out that the reason is because the money was counterfeit. So he sees what's going on. And he taps both of them on the shoulder. They're at the table. And he says, come to the bar. And he says, I see what you're doing. He says, today you stop. That stops today. And if it doesn't stop today, I'm going to kill you both. Those two guys never showed up in that casino ever again. So that was step one. That got his attention. He was very happy with that. But he still hadn't gotten to the point where he was giving him some big jobs to do. And in fact, one of the things happened that Luigi, one of the first little instances that Luigi started to feel in his own mind that he had been disrespected was this. Because he started to become much more trusted, they hooked him up with a guy who was one of the Bananos hooked him up with one of the other soldiers who was a guy they trusted for a long time. And as Luigi became more successful, this guy started to get jealous. So he had a job that needed to be done. And he told Luigi, listen, we're going to this drugstore in another part of Brooklyn. The owner of the drugstore is either a loan shark victim or a big gambling guy, owes a lot of money to Licata. We have to go and collect the money. So Luigi says, okay, no problem. He says, I'll pick you up and we'll go. So the guy picks him up. They drive to the drugstore. The guy hands a gun to Luigi. Luigi walks into the drugstore. The guy says, listen, I'll be right out here. As soon as you get the money, you get in the car, we go back to Knickerbocker Avenue. Luigi walks into the drugstore, finds the druggist, pulls out his gun, tells him why he's there. The druggist reaches under the counter, pulls out his own gun, and starts shooting at Luigi. Misses him. Luigi runs out of the store, about to get into the car, and the car is gone. The guy who was jealous of Luigi set him up. So Luigi makes his way back. makes his way back to Knickerbocker Avenue and wants to kill this guy who was in the car with him. Of course, he's a
Luigi's probably about ready to explode.
Oh, he was out of his mind. They have a sit down, and they finally settle it. Now they settle it. He gets a little money, and they become kind of partners in crime. And one of the things that they were doing, Luigi and this particular guy, whose name escapes me. Paolo Laporta. That was the guy's name. One of the things they were doing was they were both in the United States legally. They had passports. So they could travel from the United States into Canada. The Sicilians who were coming from the people coming from Sicily were going into Canada first and then making their way down into the United States. What Laporta and Luigi were doing was driving across the border into Canada with fake passports. And they would hand them out to these Sicilians who would then use the fake passports to cross the border and come down to Brooklyn. And they became part of the Bonanno army down in, and they were very successful in doing it. The other incident that these two guys did that bears telling is the same guy, Laporta, tells Luigi, we got to go collect some money from a guy who has a pizzeria in upstate New York. He says, okay. He says, what time are we going to meet? Tells him he's going to meet about 8 o'clock. He says, 8 o'clock? He said, the place is probably closed. He says, don't worry about it. So they drive all the way to this location. They go to the store. The store is closed. They break in, and what Laporta does is he disconnects all of the gas lines that go to the ovens in the place, and they leave. They get in the car. They drive about a block and a half away so they could see the place, and they wait. And Luigi says to him, what are we doing? He says, just wait. About an hour or so later, Laporta gets out of the car, goes to a phone booth. That's how long ago this was. There was actually phone booths on the street. And he calls the pizzeria. Gets in the car. 5 minutes later, the place explodes in flame. The spark from the phone call, the old-time landlines, caused the gas to explode. So they were doing okay. They liked each other. They were fine. But still, Luigi hadn't gotten to the point where he was going to do they trusted him doing what he did best, which is to kill people. So he's dealing cards one night in a casino. They had gone that far with him. And it's the table is blackjack table. Table is all made. Everybody at the table were made guys in the Bonanno family. And Luigi's listening to their conversation. And they're talking about one of their own who they know needs to be killed, which kind of gets his attention. Turns out one of the Bonanno associates that they knew and they liked very much was raping the wife, the widow of one of the Bonanno soldiers. The guy had died, a young woman. This guy basically took I shouldn't say, he essentially began pimping her out, raping her and pimping her out. And threatening her, of course. And she went to her family finally. And of course, her family went to the Bonanno people and told them what was going on. But nobody at the table wanted to kill this guy because he was their friend. So Luigi says, I'll do it. And he does. He finds out who he is. He does the same thing as he did in Milan. He figures out where the guy works, figures out how he's going to do it. It took him days to figure the whole thing out. He gets a gun from somebody on the street. He goes to a location in Brooklyn that is way down in the South Brooklyn near the Atlantic Ocean to test the gun to see if it works. And then he waits. And he waits for this guy to come out of his house one morning. Guy's getting into his car. Luigi walks up to him and blows him away. Gets in his car, drives to Atlantic City, waits a week, and then comes back. Luigi now is a hero. Everybody loves Luigi because he took care of a problem that needed to be taken care of, and they didn't have to get their hands dirty. So now he thinks this is it. I'm getting made. This is what I'm going to do. And Mike, it doesn't happen. Doesn't happen. Again, I'm telling you the reason. And what he is doing in the interim, I talked about the French Connection before. What he had been doing for them was drugs were coming into Knickerbocker Avenue via the French Connection pipeline. And when they got to Knickerbocker Avenue, they had to be distributed to the Gambinos were part of this. And Luigi's job was to drive the cocaine and heroin from Knickerbocker Avenue to the Gambino territory in Bay Ridge and Bensonhurst, and then drive back. And he did that. And now he became a lot more known to even the Gambinos and started to get more of the hits, and which is one of the reasons why he got that hit with the restaurant that I talked to you about. So as time goes on, he becomes a really trusted individual. He's very, very good at his job. He never gets caught. He never gives anybody any problem. The problem that he had is that every time he made money, he gambled it or drank it, or he was always looking for more work. So one day he says, I got to do something else. And he knows how much money loan sharks make. So he says, if I had money, I could put money on the street. I could make a lot more money in between the hits that he makes. So he goes to the same Gambino guy who had set him up earlier, and sets him up later, and tells him what he wants. And the guy says, I think I can help you. I know somebody who'll give you the money. And he said, but you got to vouch. Luigi says to him, you have to vouch for me. I don't want to pay any vig. I don't want to pay any interest. Just give me the money for a few days. I have people who are looking to borrow it, and he'll get paid back immediately. He says, okay. So they go visit this guy. He runs a business in another part of Brooklyn called the Ices Queen of America. He sells lemon ices to restaurants and candy stores and stands like that all over Brooklyn. And he goes in, and he's a Gambino soldier. And Luigi goes in, tells him what he wants, tells him who he is, and the guy is very unfriendly to him. He says, "I'll give you the 5,000," and he says, "But you got to get it back to me." I think he borrowed it on a Monday. Told him you need to get it back to me by Friday. So he says, "But someone vouched for me. Don't worry, you're not going to lose it." He says, "This is the deal. This is what you get. You get the money, but I want it back by Friday, and there's no vig." Luigi says, okay. He thinks that the guys he's lending it to are going to get him the money, pay the money back very quickly. So he gets the money, goes back to Knickerbocker Avenue, lends it to these two guys who promise him that within 2 days they'll have the money back. Well, 2 days pass, 3 days pass, 4 days pass. He looks around, where are these two guys? Well, they took off. They left. They left Knickerbocker Avenue with the money. Now he's got a problem. So he goes back to Ice's Queen, and the guy it's like Friday night now, maybe like 6 o'clock, 7 o'clock, and the place is closing up, and he walks into the office, and he tells the guy what his problem is. Now, keep in mind, he was vouched for by a made guy in the Gambino family, Luigi. But this guy, the Ice's Queen guy, says to him, I don't give a fuck. You got to give me that money. I'll give you, it's supposed to be today. I'll give you till Monday. If you don't have it by Monday, well, then there's going to be problems. Luigi is out of his mind, pissed off. Remember, I told you about the railroad guy in Sicily? So what do you think he's pissed off? Because he's being disrespected. So he says to the Ice's Queen fella, all right, don't worry. I'll be here Monday with the money. He gets in his car. He drives a few blocks away, and he's burning. He says to me, no way I could let him get away with this. Drives back to the store, parks the car, waits for him to close up, and he knows that he's in the office. The store is closed. He goes into the office, Luigi. Guy is at his desk writing. And Luigi calls him by his name, curses at him, and shoots and kills him right at his desk. The only hit he did in America, Mike, that was for his own benefit. Now, he's got to deal with, he killed a made guy in the Gambino family. So there's no suspicion. He goes to the funeral, to the wake, I should say. And at the wake, Luigi meets the brother of this guy. And the brother approaches him. And Luigi says to me, he says, I thought I was done. You know what the brother said to him?
What?
Nothing about the killing, because he doesn't know who did it. He says, I know that you borrowed money from my brother and didn't pay him back. Now you have to pay me back.
Wow.
That's what he says. That's what he told him. He said, that's how these guys are, Mike. They only care about money. Only about money.
Man.
So, yep. So that was the only time he said rough. that I did something like that for myself. So I got to tell you one other hit story that kind of really
please do
made it for me. So I'm telling you, Luigi is now respected. He's getting jobs all over the place, but they still don't make him. They don't make him. He's not a made man yet. So he gets a call from his old friend Pino DeQuana one day, and DeQuana's at the social club on Knickerbocker Avenue, and DeQuana tells him to come in, sit down. He's got a job for him. And DeQuana tells him the following. DeQuana was visited earlier that day by an old friend of his, a guy he grew up with in Sicily, who was now a police officer in the Newark, New Jersey Police Department. And the Newark cop visited DeQuana that day and told him that he needed DeQuana to get a hitman to kill the cop's brother-in-law, his sister's husband. And DeQuana asked him what the story was, and this is what the story is. The brother-in-law was a gambler, bad gambler, and a loser gambler. He was a businessman. I forgot what he was. He was an accountant that somehow had a business in Newark, New Jersey, and he gambled a lot. Gambled in Atlantic City, and one night every week, he and friends got together for a high-stakes card game, various houses. And this guy lost all the time. This particular night, he is playing, and it's getting close to the end of the night. He had been losing, but he had a great hand. And he knew that with this pot, he was going to make all of the money back and some for himself. The problem was he didn't have enough money to bet or to go in on the pot. So you know what he did? He put his wife up as the ante. He told them, I put my wife up. If I lose, then you come back to my house and you can have sex with my wife all night. He lost.
Oh.
He took the other two guys plus the three guys who were in the game with him to his house. His wife was sleeping. He woke her up, told her what was going on.
That's a rough wake-up call there.
Yep. And they raped her all night. In the morning, first call she made was to her brother, the Newark cop, and told him what had happened. Of course, his first thought was, these guys have to die, or that my brother-in-law has to die. Not these guys. My brother-in-law has to die, because she didn't know who they were. Problem is, in New Jersey, the family was the DeCavalcanti family, which was the kind of model for the Sopranos. But he couldn't go to the DeCavalcantis for a couple of reasons. One, he was a Newark cop, and you didn't want it to bounce back on him. But two, as a cop in Newark, he knew that the DeCavalcanti family were up on wires from various law enforcement agencies. So he didn't want to run the risk of being picked up on one of the wires, contracting to kill his own brother-in-law. So he thought of his old friend DeQuana in Brooklyn, came to Knickerbocker Avenue, and Luigi DeQuana got the job. And this is also one of these jobs where Luigi says to him, I'll give you a discount in terms of the money because this guy deserves to die. And Luigi does what he's done all the time. Now he's in New Jersey, so this is a new area for him. So he finds out where he works, where he lives. He lives in a residential area, so he's got to figure out where he's going to get him. And as it turns out, the guy lives in a house, and across the street from the house is kind of a wooded area. And Luigi tells me that he watched every morning to see when this guy would come out to go to work. He had tried to get him in the city in Newark, but there were too many people around and he couldn't do it. So he staked out the house, and he knew that one morning was going to be when he would do it. So he had this one particular morning, it was a Friday. I'll never forget it, because he told me that he spent the rest of the weekend in Atlantic City. So the guy comes out of his house. Luigi thinks he's going to work, and he comes out dressed like he's going fishing, which is what he was doing. This was summertime. It was warm. I said, so what'd you do? He says, well, I was parked across the street. He says, I parked in kind of a way that so that the neighbors wouldn't see the car or get suspicious. I didn't want them to call the local police. And when the guy came out of his house, I stepped around to the side of my car facing the house. He says, he holds out his hand like he's got a gun, and he shoots him. He says, I shot him one time. I hit him right in the head. I said, one shot? You got him in the head? He goes, yeah, I'm a good shot, to Mike. He says, so you got him, killed him right there, done. What'd you do next? He had to get on the Garden State Parkway to the Jersey Turnpike and then down to Atlantic City, where he spent the next week. And that was a homicide that every time I tell that story, people have the same reaction as you. What? The guy put his wife up for as the ante. And Luigi again said to me, he deserved to die. He said he deserved it. And he did it. He did it. So I'll wind this up by telling you the end of how he finally comes to us. I told you how he felt disrespected, right?
Yeah.
The Gambinos and Bonanos set up a robbery of a jewelry store in the middle of the Diamond District in Manhattan one afternoon. This is the deal. Luigi and another guy go into the store. This is in the middle of the day. And if you don't know Midtown Manhattan, 47th Street, which is the Diamond District, is one jewelry store, diamond store after another, all the way from one block to another block. People all over the place. It's a very busy area. Luigi walks in with the other guy, and they hold this place up. You get $1 million worth of diamonds. They leave the store, and the plan was for Luigi to walk from the store, which is on the west side of Manhattan, across to the east side of Manhattan. And there was a guy on the east side on 2nd Avenue waiting for him, and Luigi was supposed to hand him the diamonds, and then the guy would take off, and Luigi would go to the airport, get on a plane, and go to Chicago, where he would stay for a week. Everything worked out right. And I was so flabbergasted that this guy held up this store and was able to get across Manhattan without ever being stopped. Nobody saw him. Nobody did anything. And he got out of New York and he went to Chicago. So he gets a room in Chicago. And the plan is they're going to alert him from New York when it's okay for him to come back to Chicago, because they had a Gambino guy who was going to fence the diamonds. And then Luigi was going to come back and get his share. So he checks into the hotel. And while he's there, I think in a bar that night, he meets this older woman. And that afternoon, meets an older woman and says to her, she says to him, they introduce themselves, they get talking. And she says, are you married? He lies and says, no, I'm not. Of course he is. And she says, I'm here with my daughter. Your daughter, you might like my daughter. And she says, where are you staying? What kind of room? He says, I got a small room on one of the floors. She says, I have a big suite on the top floor of the hotel. Why don't you come and stay with us? And you can meet my daughter. We could go to dinner tonight. So Luigi says, I'm not stupid. I get out of my little room and I go up there and I'm living with them, right? They go to dinner, come back, and he goes up to the room, and that's it. He's good. He's going to stay until they call him. Well, that night, about well after midnight, two guys walk into the hotel, and they go to the desk, and they ask for Luigi Roncesvalli's room. Now, this woman behind the desk says, I can't give you the room. I can take you there, and you can knock on the door. They say, okay. She takes him up to the room. They knock on the door, and they get in. The door, for some reason, was open. I don't know. I guess Luigi didn't lock it. And they open fire. They blast the entire room with gunshots. Luigi, of course, is not in bed. He's up in the penthouse with the two women. The cops come the next day, and they question Luigi because they knew it was his room. He is with them for the entire day. He says, I don't know anything about this. I don't know what you're talking about. And of course, he doesn't. Turns out that the guy who was going to fence the diamonds didn't want to have to give Luigi his cut. And it was decided that they were going to wipe him out. He was going to get wiped out. And he comes back to New York, and he goes to Licata. At this point, there was a new guy in Knickerbocker Avenue, a guy named Catalano, Toto Catalano, because they killed Licata because of the drug business. He didn't want the drug business. The Bananos killed him, and they put this other guy, Catalano, in. So Catalano sets a meeting up in a restaurant in Manhattan before the restaurant opens, where they're supposed to be cutting up the diamonds, and also a meeting because Luigi wants to kill the fence. So they're in there. They squash the whole thing. They tell Luigi, "Don't worry, you'll get your piece." And they're starting to divvy up the diamonds. Luigi's sitting there. He says, "Nobody gives me any diamond. There's one left, one big diamond." He says, "I figured that was for me." Except somebody walked in the restaurant at that time, and he walks over to the table. He says, and I look up, Mike, you know who it is? It's I can't believe the names. Castellano. It was the head of the Gambino family. And he walks in and he sits down at the table, and they all now are very deferential to him. And I said, "So what happened?" He said, "That big diamond that I thought was going to me, they pass it across the table and give it to Castellano. Castellano. So I said, "Are you kidding?" He goes, "No." I said, "What did he do?" He said, "Thank you." He got up and he left the restaurant. I said, "What did you get?" He said, "They gave me a lousy $30,000 for doing this robbery in the middle of Manhattan, where I was carrying $1 million worth of diamonds at that time across the borough and giving it to someone. I got away, and they want to kill me in Chicago, and that's what they give me." So he never forgot that. Never forgot that. So these little things that he felt were kind of slights to him were building up. And this is the end. He gets a call from his buddy in the Gambino family who says that this international criminal named Michele Sindona is looking for a hitman in New York. Michele Sindona was a guy who was involved in bankrupting banks all through Italy, and finally was convinced the Pope Paul VI, to give him access to the Vatican Bank. And he basically was doing the same thing. It was stealing from the Vatican Bank, using it as a money laundering operation for the Gambino family. And he gets caught, and he gets indicted in New York, and he gets indicted in Italy. He got indicted in New York because he bankrupted a bank in New York called the Franklin National Bank. He got caught in Italy because he was bankrupting banks all over. And now he had to stand trial in Italy and in New York. Federal court in New York, and in Italy, and their court in Italy. So his way out was, in his mind, the way to get himself out from under this was to kill the prosecutor in New York and to kill the prosecutor judge in Italy. So he wants a hitman to do both jobs. And Sindona speaks he meets with Luigi, tells him what he wants. Luigi says, oh, and they also wanted him to intimidate a witness too, threaten a witness so he wouldn't testify. So Luigi thinks about it, and he tells me there was no way I was killing a prosecutor in New York. He said that. He says, if I did that, I'm no good here. I have to leave. He says, and how am I going to get to Italy if I kill a prosecutor in New York and I get caught?
No.
So he says, I tell Sindona, I'll do the thing with the witness. I'll threaten him, but I'm not doing the 2 killings, even though he was promised $100 grand for each killing. That was basically the kiss of death, Mike. Luigi is now cut off, and he's starving for money. And he gets wind of a courier service that was picking up money in Queens and delivering it to businesses, an armored car situation. And he knows where it is, and they tell him that the courier always has at least $30,000 in a bag. Tells him where it is. He sets it up with 2 other guys, and the plan was for them to wait for the armored car guy to come out with the bag from whatever location it was, some store or a bank, and he was going to go over, hold it up to get in the car and drive to one of their houses and split up the money. So everything is cool. They're waiting, and here's the armored car comes. The armored car courier goes into the location, comes out, and Luigi says, Mike, it's no man, it's a woman. The courier is a woman. He says, I can't rob no woman. He said, in Sicily, we don't rob women. He says, I can't do that.
Oh my
but I had no choice because I needed the money. So he holds up the woman, steals the bag. They drive to this guy's house. Little did they know that the police were either tipped off or had seen it. And they follow him. And in front of the house, they get the car trapped. By the way, he checked the bag while they were driving to the house. $3,000 in the bag, not 30. He said, so for all of this, that's what I get arrested. He goes to court. They set $500 bail. That's how long ago this was. $500 bail for an armed robbery. And he says, but I don't have no $500. So what does he do? From jail, he calls Sindona. He said, and here's why he calls Sindona. He says, I call Sindona and tell him I need $30,000 to get out of the country. And I tell him that if I get out of the country, nobody can get anything out of me for what you wanted me to do. So there was a nice little threat. Sindona basically tells him, get lost. No. Now he doesn't know what to do. He finally gets the $500 from his brother-in-law. And I'm sorry, I made a mistake. He asked Sindona for the $500. Sindona said no. He finally gets his brother-in-law on the phone and tells him where he is. And the brother-in-law posts the $500 bail. Now he gets out. And he tells me, I can't testify. Nobody can have me in court telling a jury that I robbed a woman. I can never go back to Sicily. My family will disown me. He says, I can't do it. I got to get out of the country. I can't go to court. So he tries again with Sindona. He calls Sindona. Now he's leads more of a hint. Give me 30 grand. I'm out of here. And then nobody can talk to me. Nobody will bother me. Nobody will hear anything from me. Sindona tells him, no. I said, so what'd you do? He said, I got that night. I walked into a precinct in Manhattan and I said, I want to talk to the FBI. And that was it. And the FBI, he told them about Sindona, told them about the threat against the prosecutor, told them about the threat against the guy in Italy. Oh, by the way, Sindona didn't only want him to kill the prosecutor. He wanted Luigi to plant a bag of cocaine on him so that it would look like a drug deal gone bad. That's how fucking sick this guy was. So Luigi tells him no, and the FBI picks him up and they debrief him, and then the rest, as I mentioned to you, is history. They finally get him to me, and now during the time he was with me, he's in protective custody in the Brooklyn House of Detention. He gives me information about another crime. He gives me, when Carmine Galante was killed, he was interviewed by people, and he told them who he thought the killers were, and it turns out they were the killers. And then he ultimately goes off to Minnesota to jail. He finally pled guilty. We put him in a federal prison as opposed to a state prison, and he's going to do his time. And while he's in that prison, he finds out about Reagan's Commission on Organized Crime, and that one of the hearings is going to be about drug trafficking. So this was his way out. He never told me about the drug trafficking. That was something he held back. And the key is that
right?
once the French Connection got dried up, and you know that if you watch the movie, if you saw the movie, they started something new called the Pizza Connection. And Luigi was instrumental in trafficking drugs that were coming into the country via pizza supplies all over the Eastern Seaboard and into the Midwest. And he knew all about it. And he would pick up the drugs, deliver them to Catalano on Knickerbocker Avenue. And he knew everything about the Pizza Connection. And when he testified in front of Congress, Rudy Giuliani, who was prosecuting the case along with Louis Freeh, the Pizza Connection case in which there were about 30 defendants, saw Luigi and said, I need him as a witness. And he became a witness, not only in Congress, but he became a witness for the Pizza Connection trial, which he was instrumental in getting the conviction because he knew all about it. It was a very, very interesting case. And he had been in witness protection after that, and he couldn't make it in witness protection. And he ultimately he had testified against Catalano, and then he tried to get back and say what I'd said was a lie. That was his way of making money. And it turns out that he finally was wised up and said, if I do that, I'm going to get locked up again for perjury. So the long and short of it is he didn't recant. His testimony stood. Everybody in the Pizza Connection case got convicted and went to jail. Luigi went back into the witness protection, and he hated every single second of it. Every second. He was separated from his family. He was all over the country. He was in little, shithole towns where he had to live. It was just horrible. And I found out, I thought.
You can't help kind of want to root.
What's that? I'm sorry.
You can't help but to kind of want to root for the guy.
Yeah,
I said you can't help but to kind of want to root for the guy a little bit.
Yeah, well, he was he became, he was looking to become a man of honor in the Sicilian way, but he became a man of honor because he did the right thing and came up with and testified to all of these things, for us and for the government. And so in a way, he did become, in his quest. The book is called Luigi the Zip and a Hitman's Quest for Honor. He did ultimately, become an honorable guy. Now, I thought when I first started writing this book that he had died in jail. Turns out, or in witness protection. Turns out I found out that he killed himself because he just couldn't. He couldn't live the life.
I heard that.
Yeah. So that's that's it. There's a lot more, but I encourage your readers, your listeners and your viewers to go get the book. In fact, I just happen to have it here. Here it is. Homicide is My Business.
Oh.
And
I'm going to put the link down in the description and all that stuff too.
Good. Thank you. So
yes.
So that's it.
Well, Mike,
I learned a lot.
I appreciate it so much, man.
That's okay. I appreciate you having me. The publicity is valuable. So happy to do it, Mike. Anytime you need me to want me to come back, I'll be happy to do it. So we didn't talk about the mob cops. Maybe next time.
Yeah, well, that'd be we'll leave one more open for the mob cops, maybe a couple weeks or something.
That's great. Just let me know when and I'm around. Okay.
Awesome, man. I'll be in touch, Mike.
Okay. You have a good one.
Thanks again.
All right. Take care of that little boy.
Will, buddy. Take care.
Okay.